The night air was thick with the scent of rain, but no amount of moisture could cleanse the blood that stained the concrete beneath her body. Shayla's death had been swift, a brutal end to a life that had been shattered by betrayal. Her eyes, wide open in eternal shock, reflected the eerie streetlights above. They told a story, one that few would understand, but all would eventually feel the consequences of. Who killed her? That was the question that hung in the air like smoke, unanswered and taunting. The police were baffled. The scene was too clean, too well organized to be a random act of violence. A blunt instrument, used with the kind of precision only someone who knew her well could manage, had ended her life. No signs of struggle, no screams for help, just the coldness of someone who had planned it all. As the authorities arrived, they began to piece together the fragments of the night. Shayla's death wasn't a random killing. It was calculated, planned, and executed with meticulous care. And the more the detectives dug, the more they realized this wasn't a crime born out of rage. It was vengeance, a message sent from someone who had been wronged. The truth of the murder was tangled in the years Shayla had spent behind bars, wrongfully convicted of a crime she didn't commit. Marcus, the man who had betrayed her, framed her, and left her to rot in prison, was the key. He had manipulated her into taking the fall for a crime he committed. For 9 years, Shayla sat in a cell with only one thought consuming her: revenge. But when she was released, a different woman emerged. The prison walls that had confined her body did little to contain the fury inside. And now she was dead, her life snuffed out too soon, but her story, her vengeance, had only just begun. Shayla had always trusted Marcus. He was more than just a lover to her, he was her partner, her confidant, the man who promised her a future. He was the kind of man who knew how to make a woman feel invincible, loved, and cherished. And in the early days of their relationship, Shayla believed him with every fiber of her being. But love, as Shayla would learn the hard way, was a dangerous weapon when it was wielded by someone with ulterior motives. It began with small signs, fleeting moments that Shayla, in the midst of her love, ignored. Marcus would disappear for hours, even days, without explanation. When he returned, he would act as if nothing had happened, masking his lies with charm and tenderness. Shayla never questioned him. She was too blinded by her feelings, too enamored by the man she thought she knew. But the truth, as it always does, came to light in a way that could not be ignored. Marcus wasn't the man he appeared to be. Beneath the facade of the loving boyfriend was a man driven by greed, power, and a complete lack of conscience. Shayla was nothing more than a pawn in his scheme, an obstacle to be eliminated when his plan began to unravel. The man Shayla trusted was the same one who set her up for a crime she didn't commit. It all started one fateful night when Marcus came to her with an idea that seemed too good to refuse. They had been struggling financially for some time. Marcus knew of a wealthy businessman, someone whose empire could be manipulated and brought to its knees with the right leverage. It was a robbery. Simple and straightforward. Marcus would get in with the businessman, gain his trust, and then take him down. But there was a catch. Marcus needed a scapegoat, someone to take the fall when the plan went wrong. That's when he turned to Shayla. He knew she would never suspect him, that she would always stand by him. He knew that she would be the perfect distraction, the perfect alibi. Shayla, unaware of the depths of Marcus's deceit, agreed. She loved him, after all, and she believed in their future. What Marcus failed to tell her was that he had already planned the crime in such a way that all the evidence would point directly to her. It wasn't just a robbery, it was a murder. The wealthy businessman had been targeted, and Marcus had made sure to set up a scenario where Shayla's fingerprints were all over the crime scene. The bloodied weapon, a hammer he'd planted in her purse, was all but guaranteed to seal her fate. When the crime was discovered, the police investigation seemed to fall right into place. Witnesses had seen Shayla leaving the scene, her face caught on surveillance footage just outside the building. The hammer was found with her prints. The motive? A lover's betrayal, a jealous rage fueled by imagined grievances. Shayla had been framed as the desperate woman who had killed for money, for vengeance, or simply out of some twisted passion. Shayla tried to defend herself during the investigation, but no one listened. The evidence was too convincing. The more she protested, the more it seemed as if she were guilty. She had been painted as the perfect suspect, the perfect victim of Marcus's design. Her trial was swift. The courtroom echoed with the testimonies of witnesses who seemed to confirm the damning evidence. Shayla was convicted without mercy, and the truth, that Marcus had set her up, was buried beneath layers of lies and deceit. 9 years she spent in prison. 9 years locked away from the world, cut off from her family, her friends, her life. And throughout it all, Marcus had remained untouched. His empire continued to grow, his life continued to prosper, while Shayla's was stolen from her. But what Marcus didn't account for was Shayla's resilience. She may have been broken by the system, but she wasn't broken in spirit. While the world around her forgot her, she never forgot him. The rage festered, turning into something darker, more dangerous. And when the day came that she was finally released from prison, she had one thing on her mind: revenge. Shayla's heart raced as she sat in the cold, sterile interrogation room. Her hands trembled in her lap, but she forced herself to remain still, to stay calm. She had been in this room before, had faced questioning countless times, but this was different. This time, everything was at stake. The detective across from her, a seasoned investigator named Detective Harris, stared at her with cold, calculating eyes. His voice was steady, devoid of sympathy as he went over the details of the crime. "Shayla, we have your fingerprints on the weapon. You were seen leaving the scene. Witnesses say you had a confrontation with the victim earlier in the week. What is there left for you to explain?" Each word cut deeper than the last. Shayla's mind was racing, but her mouth was dry, her thoughts scrambled. She had never met the businessman. She had never laid a hand on him. She had no reason to harm him. But the evidence, it all pointed to her. She tried to explain, tried to say that she was being set up, that someone was framing her. But the words stuck in her throat. No one believed her. No one ever did. The detective's expression didn't change. He leaned forward, his fingers steepled on the table. "You're telling me someone planted the weapon in your purse, someone framed you for this murder? That's quite a story, Shayla. But the evidence is clear. You had a motive. You were at the scene. And now we have your fingerprints on the murder weapon." Shayla's chest tightened. It didn't matter how many times she repeated the truth, no one was listening. She was a black woman, a woman with a history, and she had no chance in a system that was already stacked against her. No one cared that she was innocent. To the court, she was just another criminal, another statistic. The trial was nothing more than a formality. The prosecution painted her as the jealous lover who killed out of rage. The evidence was irrefutable: witnesses who had seen her near the scene, a bloodied hammer found in her purse, and a trail of circumstantial evidence that pointed directly to her. The more the prosecution presented, the more hopeless Shayla's situation became. Her defense attorney, an inexperienced public defender, barely put up a fight. He was overworked, underfunded, and seemed just as defeated by the system as Shayla. He didn't push for the truth, didn't challenge the evidence. His arguments were weak, his motions ignored. Shayla was alone in that courtroom. Alone against a system that didn't care to listen, against a system that had already made up its mind. The media, too, was quick to latch onto the narrative. Shayla's face appeared on TV screens across the city, her story splashed across the headlines. The press had already convicted her. They didn't care about the facts, they cared about the drama, about the sensationalism. A woman driven to murder for love, for money, for jealousy. The public was already sure of her guilt. The trial lasted only a few days, but for Shayla, it felt like a lifetime. The courtroom became a blur of faces, voices, and gestures. She couldn't hear the words anymore, couldn't focus on the details. She was drowning in the overwhelming certainty that no one would ever believe her. No one would ever see her for who she truly was, a victim of Marcus's manipulation. And when the jury returned with the verdict, guilty, Shayla felt the weight of it all come crashing down on her. She had been condemned to spend the next 9 years of her life in prison for a crime she didn't commit. Her thoughts were a whirlwind as the judge sentenced her. The words were a blur, drowned out by the deafening noise in her head. 9 years. She could barely comprehend it. It wasn't just the years of her life that were stolen from her, it was the future, the family, the career, the dream she had built. All of it gone. But the worst part, the part that gnawed at her from the inside out, was the knowledge that Marcus, the man who had orchestrated it all, was free. He had escaped the consequences of his actions, and now he was continuing his life, his career, his success. He was living the life Shayla had dreamed of, while she was locked away behind bars. As the guards led her away, the weight of her unjust conviction settled heavily on her shoulders. But deep down, something inside her burned. She wasn't going to let Marcus win. She couldn't. The real prison, she realized, wasn't just the walls and bars, it was the anger that fueled her, the desire for revenge that would keep her going. Shayla vowed, as they closed the heavy cell door behind her, that she would never forget. And one day, when the time was right, she would make Marcus pay. The clang of the heavy cell door echoed in Shayla's ears, a constant reminder that her world had been reduced to 4 walls. The first few days in prison had been the hardest: uncertainty, fear, and the crushing weight of the injustice that had placed her here. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Shayla began to learn how to survive. Prison was a place where everything was different. The rules were harsh and the environment was unforgiving. The other inmates were relentless, looking for weaknesses, testing boundaries. But Shayla had one thing they didn't: determination. She wasn't just a prisoner, she was a woman with a purpose, and that purpose was to survive, to find a way out, and ultimately to make Marcus pay. She spent the first few months in a haze, numb to the world around her. There was no one to talk to, no one who understood what she was going through. The nights were the worst, the silence of the dark cell pressing in on her, the injustice of it all twisting her gut. But in the quiet, she began to find something else: a fire. Her hatred for Marcus had been building even before her conviction, but in prison, it became all-consuming. She thought about him constantly, the man who had betrayed her, who had stolen everything from her. The memories of their time together played on a loop in her mind, each one a reminder of the deceit that had led her to this place. She had been so naive back then. She had trusted him completely, believed in his promises. But now, locked behind bars, Shayla saw the truth. Marcus had used her. He had turned her into a scapegoat for his own crimes. And for what? To build his own empire, to live a life of luxury while she rotted in prison. It was a betrayal beyond words, a wound that would never heal. As time went on, Shayla started to plan. At first it was small things. She began reading anything she could get her hands on. Law books, crime novels, stories of revenge. She poured herself into learning, figuring out the best ways to manipulate the system that had trapped her. But it wasn't just about escaping. It was about making sure that when she was free, Marcus would pay. The prison library became her sanctuary. There, she devoured books on criminal law, investigative techniques, and revenge. She was no longer a victim, she was becoming a strategist, a woman with a plan. The more she learned, the more confident she became. She began to see the holes in her case, the lies that had been ignored, the evidence that had been suppressed. But even with all the knowledge she had gained, she knew there was no easy way out. Her conviction had been a carefully orchestrated plan, and getting out of prison wouldn't be simple. But Shayla wasn't looking for an easy way out. She was preparing for something far more significant. She needed to know how to destroy Marcus's life, to make sure that when she stepped out of prison, she had the power to turn the tables on him. Her time in prison had hardened her. She was no longer the woman who had once trusted, loved, and believed in Marcus. She had become something else entirely, a woman with nothing left to lose, a woman whose only goal was revenge. Shayla also began to form alliances with other inmates. She had always been a quiet person, keeping to herself, but now she needed to gather information. She made herself useful, took on small tasks, and earned the trust of those around her. Some of the women she befriended were there for petty crimes, others for far worse. But all of them had one thing in common: they understood betrayal. Shayla used their stories to fuel her own resolve, drawing strength from their pain and anger. Her days were spent in a haze of routines: exercise, meals, and visits to the library. But each night, when the lights went out, Shayla would lie awake, imagining Marcus's life on the outside. She would picture him living the life she should have had, his family thriving while hers was broken. But in her mind, she was already plotting the end to his story. As the years went by, Shayla's physical appearance changed. She became leaner, more toned, a reflection of the mental fortitude she had developed. The prison had stripped her of many things, but it had given her something even more valuable: time. Time to think, to plan, to wait. And when she was finally released after 9 long years, Shayla walked out of those prison gates a different person than when she had entered. The sound of the prison gates opening felt surreal, almost dreamlike. Shayla stood in front of the massive rusted doors, her breath catching in her throat. She had waited for this moment for so long, and yet, it felt like it wasn't really happening. The outside world seemed both distant and overwhelmingly close at the same time. She could hear the distant hum of traffic, the occasional honk of a horn, the sound of birds chirping in the sky, simple things that had once been so ordinary, but now felt like luxuries she hadn't seen in years. Shayla blinked as the sunlight hit her face, the bright warmth of the day a stark contrast to the cold, sterile prison walls she had left behind. Her skin, pale from years of confinement, tingled from the exposure to daylight. She took a slow breath, feeling the weight of it all pressed down on her chest. She was free, but freedom didn't feel like the triumph she had imagined. It felt like a new kind of prison, one where the world had moved on without her, and she had to navigate it all over again. Her first steps outside felt like walking on unfamiliar ground. The concrete beneath her shoes was solid, unyielding just as it had always been, but now it felt different. It felt like the ground was shifting beneath her, as if every step was leading her toward something bigger, more dangerous. She didn't have much, just a bag with her few belongings, the remnants of a life that had been stolen from her. The world outside had changed and so had she. But there was no time for nostalgia, no time to get lost in the overwhelming sensations of freedom. Her mind was laser-focused on the task at hand. Marcus was still out there, living his life, oblivious to the storm that was coming for him. Shayla didn't waste any time settling in. The moment she walked out of the prison gates, she got to work. She had a list of things to do, a plan to execute, and she wouldn't let anything, not her past, not her fears, and certainly not the pity of others, stand in her way. Her first call was to her old contacts. She had made some connections while in prison and she needed to use those now. She reached out to people who knew how the world worked on the outside, people who had connections who could help her navigate the system that had once abandoned her. These people were invaluable, eyes and ears in places that she couldn't afford to go herself. They had kept track of Marcus, knew where he was, what he was doing, and who he was with. All the information she would need to make sure that his downfall would be absolute. Shayla also started revisiting her old haunts, the places she had once frequented with Marcus. She needed to see them again, to feel the weight of the past pressing against her. She walked the streets, observing the changes, trying to blend in as she searched for any piece of information that might help her. She wasn't the same woman who had left this place 9 years ago. She was colder now, sharper, more calculating. She thought about Marcus constantly. What was he doing? Was he still the same man, the charming liar who had destroyed her life? Or had he changed, become something else entirely? The questions gnawed at her, but they were nothing compared to the rage that simmered beneath the surface. He had to pay. He had ruined everything for her, and she would not rest until he had paid for every second of it. As the days passed, Shayla became more and more obsessed. She wasn't here just to live again, she was here to destroy. She watched Marcus from the shadows, learning his routine, his weaknesses, the people he associated with. Every day she learned something new, a piece of the puzzle falling into place. The more she gathered, the clearer the picture became. She had been framed once, but this time she would be the one pulling the strings. Marcus had no idea what was coming for him, but he would soon. Shayla stood outside the lavish building, her heart pounding in her chest. The world around her seemed to blur, the noise of traffic, the hum of life continuing as usual, fading into the background. It was just her, focused, determined, and ready. She had waited for this moment for so long, too long. 9 years had passed since Marcus had set her up, since her life had been ripped apart. But she had made it, she had endured, and now she was in control. It was her turn to set things right, to make Marcus and his wife feel the pain she had suffered for all those years. The plan had been simple, but that was the beauty of it. Marcus never saw it coming. He thought she was broken, just another victim of the system. But what he didn't know was that Shayla had spent every waking moment in prison plotting, preparing for this very night. Tonight it was over. She moved quickly, slipping through the shadows. The mansion where Marcus lived with his wife, Lily, was surrounded by high walls and guarded entrances, but Shayla had learned the layout over the course of weeks. She knew the weaknesses, the blind spots. Marcus had always prided himself on being untouchable, on living above the law, but tonight, that arrogance would cost him everything. Shayla reached the back gate. It was unlocked as she had anticipated. Everything was going according to plan. She knew exactly where Marcus and Lily would be. They had a routine, a quiet dinner in the dining room followed by a drink in the study. They were predictable, and that was exactly what Shayla needed. She moved with the quiet precision of someone who had learned how to blend into the background, how to fade into the shadows. The sound of her footsteps was absorbed by the thick carpet of the hallway. She paused for a moment, gathering herself. This was it. She had considered every possibility, every outcome. There would be no second chances. Once she went through with this, there would be no turning back. Marcus would die tonight. Shayla's heart beat faster as she crept toward the study. She could hear the faint murmur of voices inside, the clink of glasses, the soft laughter. Marcus was laughing just as he had when they first met. It made Shayla's blood boil. He had used that laughter to manipulate her, to make her feel safe, loved, all while plotting her downfall. Now he would pay for every smile, every lie. She slipped through the door, the weight of the silence between them more deafening than any sound. Marcus and Lily didn't see her at first. They were seated on the plush leather chairs, drinking wine, oblivious to the storm about to hit their lives. Shayla stood there for a moment, just watching them, seeing Marcus as the man who had stolen everything from her, seeing Lily as the woman who had stood by him while he destroyed her. Shayla moved swiftly. The silenced pistol in her hand felt cool, almost detached, but it was her weapon of choice, quiet, efficient, final. She raised it with steady hands, her eyes locked on Marcus. His face shifted from surprise to recognition, but it was too late. She fired. The shot rang out, but it was soft, muffled, swallowed by the thick walls of the mansion. Marcus's body slumped, a silent collapse into the chair, his expression frozen in disbelief. Lily screamed, but it was brief, just a flicker of terror before Shayla silenced her as well, a second shot taking her life just as swiftly. The two of them lay there, their lives extinguished in a matter of moments. Shayla stood over them, her chest heaving with the exertion of what she had done. The feeling inside her wasn't relief, wasn't triumph. It was something else, something deeper. The rage had been replaced with a strange emptiness. She had finally done it, she had taken back control, but at what cost? For a moment, Shayla just stood there, her mind quiet. She looked down at the two lifeless bodies before her, wondering if this was the justice she had always imagined. But the answer was clear, there would be no closure. She had gotten her revenge, but there was nothing left now. Nothing but the hollow echoes of the past. The sound of distant sirens reached her ears, snapping her back to reality. The time for reflection would come later. For now, she had to disappear to erase all traces of her involvement. She turned and moved quickly, leaving the mansion just as silently as she had entered. The world would never know the true story of what happened that night. But Shayla had her answer, her justice, her revenge. She had finally become the woman who had taken back everything. Shayla walked away from the mansion, her steps heavy, her heart racing in her chest. The night air was cool against her skin, but it did little to calm the storm inside her. She had done it. She had killed Marcus and Lily, the two people who had ruined her life. It should have been a moment of triumph, of relief, but it wasn't. For the first time in years, she felt the full weight of her actions. It wasn't guilt, not exactly, but something else. Something she hadn't expected. Empty. The void inside her was deeper than she had imagined. Revenge, she had learned, was a bitter companion. It wasn't as sweet as she had fantasized. It didn't heal the wounds, it just made them sharper, more real. As she made her way through the dark streets, she thought about the years she had spent in prison, the endless hours of planning, the faces of the people she had manipulated, the lies she had told herself. She had spent so much time imagining this moment, imagining the feeling she would get when she finally had Marcus in her grasp. But standing here, in the cold silence of the night, all she could feel was a hollowness that made her question everything. What had it all been for? Was this truly justice, or was it just revenge disguised as something noble? The question haunted her as she disappeared into the shadows, vanishing into the night. She had planned every detail, had made sure there were no loose ends. But as the adrenaline began to fade, she realized that the hardest part of the plan was yet to come. What would she do now? Shayla knew she couldn't go back to the life she had before. There was no place for her in the world that had turned its back on her, no home waiting for her. She had become someone else entirely, someone who had crossed a line she could never uncross. And now there was no turning back. She couldn't go to the police. The evidence was clear. Marcus and Lily had been murdered in cold blood, and the city would want justice. She would become the most wanted woman in the country, and the thought of being caught, of facing the consequences of what she had done, made her stomach churn. But what other choice did she have? What was left for her now? The thrill she had expected was now replaced with a gnawing sense of dread. It wasn't just the fear of being caught, it was the realization that she had killed two people and now had nothing left to hold on to. Her revenge had cost her everything, her peace of mind, her sense of justice, her future. She spent the following days in hiding, constantly moving, unable to stay in one place for too long. The world was still spinning, life was still going on for everyone else, but for Shayla, everything had changed. Her revenge had been swift, precise, and effective, but it had also been her undoing. She thought about the old Shayla, the woman she had been before the trial, before prison, before Marcus's betrayal. That woman had had dreams, hopes, a future. Now that woman was gone, replaced by someone who had killed to survive, to get back what had been stolen from her. But what she had failed to realize was that the cost of her revenge had been her soul. It wasn't just Marcus who had taken everything from her, it was the path she had chosen to take in order to destroy him. Shayla had lost her humanity in the pursuit of vengeance. She had sacrificed everything she once cared about, love, justice, peace, for a fleeting moment of satisfaction that now felt like ash in her mouth. As the sirens grew louder in the distance, Shayla knew that the world was closing in on her. She couldn't outrun the past forever. She had made her bed and now she would have to lie in it. But even as the world around her seemed to collapse, there was a strange sense of finality in her heart. She had gotten her revenge. Marcus had paid for what he had done to her. Lily too had paid the price for standing by him. But in the end there was no satisfaction. There was no victory, no celebration. Only the silence of a woman who had become a ghost, forever haunted by the consequences of her actions.